Thank you, Jane, and thanks Helen and the Grand Canyon Association for the partnership they have with Grand Canyon National Park in preserving our resources and educating our visitors. And thank you for inviting myself and my colleagues to talk about the work that we're doing in the park. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. I've had the pleasure over the past 4.5 years of working in the national park, and tonight I'd like to share with you the results of some recent archaeological work. Now you might, a lot of people have asked me about the title of my presentation, and I'm going to take a minute to explain. You might think the extreme refers to some new school of archaeology, ArcX. And you might think that from this photograph, I'm getting ready to engage in some new extreme sports science like vertical survey or aerial reconnaissance. Fortunately not. Actually, this picture was taken a few years ago when we were in full safety gear doing some ruins preservation work at one of our sites. The extreme in the title refers to the canyon landscape that people adapted to over thousands of years. And I am constantly amazed at where we find evidence for how and where people made a living at Grand Canyon. It says something about human tenacity, resilience, and adaptability. If you were, say, a farmer 1,000 years ago making a living at the Grand Canyon, you would find the landscape incredibly and extremely challenging, yet at times extremely nourishing. The Grand Canyon is extremely beautiful and extremely inspiring. And of course, if you're an archaeologist, the Grand Canyon is extremely interesting and thought-provoking. This is a photograph of us doing work at a small farmhouse. The only thing that remains are the stones that were used in the walls and the foundation, but just an incredible setting up there on that bench land halfway between the North Rim and the river. Why were people living there? How did they make a living? If you can't see it, that little white dot right there is myself, and we are visiting a small site in an alcove that people took the time to build a small room out of mud and stone and wood beams, and it's a place where they stored their grains and other things that they were farming. What an extreme setting for a little stone house like that. It took, it's not a technical climb to get up there, but it's extremely rugged. And if you can't see it, there's a similar granary off the North Rim. And what an incredible place. Now you might think this is new archaeological research. Why are we looking at a picture of an old crusty guy? But this is John Wesley Powell, and good research starts with asking good questions. And John Wesley Powell, we can credit him with asking some of the first questions about Grand Canyon archaeology over 140 years ago. He took the time on his 2 expeditions through the Grand Canyon to identify and put on maps little sites that he was finding along the river. And he took the time not only to identify and locate those, but talk to the people who were closest to the river that he was traveling through and asking them what those stone houses were that he was seeing, how old they were, and who may have used them and what they may have functioned for. Decades later, interest in Grand Canyon archaeology continues, and it's through the work of private foundations that archaeology really gets going in the national parks, like the Hilo Pueblo Foundation sponsoring the first excavation at Grand Canyon at Tusayan Ruin. In the 1960s and 70s is when the federal government is funding large projects, and for the first time hiring and using archaeologists to run resource management programs in the national parks. And this is, of course, the same time in our history when federal laws are passed to protect the environment, and specifically archaeological sites and other cultural sites. And so the program that we work in today and the research that we do has built on the work of these earlier archaeologists and earlier programs in the federal government. Today, our program is largely based on partnerships with like NAU and the Museum of Northern Arizona. For example, the excavation project that we're currently involved with now on the Colorado River, excavating 9 sites, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then also through funding special emphasis programs like the Vanishing Treasures program to do ruins preservation work and research on the architecture. And of course our partnerships extend to our neighboring tribal governments, of which we have 11 affiliated tribes at the Grand Canyon. And we are located, in this vicinity here next to the Hopi, Southern Paiute, Yavapai, and Havasu reservations. Now the tribal governments help us in consultation plan for projects in the park and implement projects that may affect cultural resources. So it's really through that partnership that we develop a bigger perspective for the resources that we manage and come up with appropriate alternatives for how we manage the park. Whoa. That's extreme, isn't it? Sometimes in the courtroom they won't allow cameras, so they have an artist do a rendition of the proceedings for the day. Well, this was our management meeting on Monday. Here's the superintendent, he's trying to motivate his management team, and of course, we have a herd mentality, so we're moving at a glacial pace here, and there's issues with the Colorado River. Actually, this is research that was done at NAU a little over 20 years ago, and it's a paleo-environmental reconstruction of what the canyon environment may have looked like at the end of the Pleistocene, or at the end of the Ice Age about 12 to 14,000 years ago. And it looks radically different today than what it did then, and it was largely because of the study of pack rat middens and pollen and paleontological remains that were found in caves. A whole different setting than what you see today. But again, it's another example of research that sets the foundation for work in archaeology. So by the numbers, Grand Canyon Archaeology, we've got 1.2 million acres that we manage within the national park. Currently we have about 4,000 archaeological sites identified and documented. But that 4,000 site total represents no more than 5% of the total park that we've systematically surveyed or inventoried for archaeological resources. So that means there could be an estimated 50,000 archaeological sites located within the boundaries of the national park. And so some quick numbers say that if we record 50 sites a year, it would take over 1,000 years to really identify and document every archaeological or cultural resource within the park. And of course we have 11 affiliated Native American tribes that we work with, and that all amount